I'm Chance Dorland, and this is the Spurs Insider, our weekly NBA podcast from ExpressNews.com. And I'm joined this week by San Antonio Express News sports writer Mike Finger. Mike, great to have you back here on the podcast. There have been some interesting games so far in this very short season thus far. Let's talk about the most recent. There was that great victory against LeBron James and the Los Angeles Lakers, and then now, most recently, a loss to Indiana.
Yeah, and what we're starting to see, Chance, is kind of a new personality, a new look of the San Antonio Spurs that fans haven't seen in a long time, if ever. Looking at the advanced statistics in the NBA this morning, the Spurs have the second highest rated offense in the league in terms of points per 100 possessions, and the absolute worst defense. They're giving up more points per possession than anybody in the league, and that's almost sacrilege when it comes to Greg Popovich and the Spurs. I mean, this has been a franchise, as everybody knows, it's kind of built its name and built its dynasty on being able to stop people, and that's just not happening so far. In a way, it's kind of following the trend of the entire league. You know, teams are giving up so many points this year, scoring so many points this year, and there's a lot of different theories as to why that's happening, but that doesn't make it any easier for certainly Greg Popovich and people who are following the Spurs to be able to kind of accept or comprehend what's going on with this defense. You know, I think there's some panic from people right now. We're as you said, we're still really early in the year. That we're only 4 games in. Things could change, but right now it's kind of hard to get used to.
Yeah, I was actually at a restaurant with a friend some days ago when the LA game was on, and I looked up and I'm like, oh, it's the fourth quarter because of the score. And then I went, oh, no, it's the third quarter.
And that's happening, like I said earlier, league wide. There's been a change in the shot clock where it resets to 14 instead of 24 after offensive rebounds, and that's part of it. Another part of it is there's this point of emphasis that the league's officials are using in terms of allowing more freedom of movement on offense, especially on the wing. But I think in general, teams are just focusing so much on the 3-point ball and on getting good shots, and the quality of shots teams are getting are better than ever. And the Spurs have not been immune to this. And like you said, the end of that, end of the third quarter of that Lakers game, the Spurs have 99 points and they're in a dogfight. And you think back, what's it been, 13, 14 years to the Spurs Pistons finals in 05. Those final scores in that NBA finals were less than what we're seeing in third quarters now. So the game has changed. It's certainly had an impact on the Spurs, and I think that the defense for the Spurs will improve throughout the season. Right now, they are dealing with a couple of key injuries, especially in the backcourt, where they're just kind of at a disadvantage a lot of times. And if we want to move forward to the Indiana game on Wednesday night, this was another example of this, in that they just don't have the defenders in the backcourt with certainly DeJounte Murray going down for the season, even without Derek White and Lonnie Walker, the draft pick. They don't match up size-wise with big backcourts. And I think big backcourts are going to give the Spurs problems throughout the season for a long time. And there's not an obvious fix for that. There's certain things that I think the Spurs can do and Popovich will do throughout the year in terms of changing lineups, maybe even going the other direction and playing smaller with LaMarcus Aldridge playing center and trying to match up that way. But for now, there's not a Band-Aid. There's not a quick fix for this defense. It's just something that they're going to have to live with.
Let's go ahead and give each one of these games its due, maybe try to break it down and give some commentary here and there. I loved the LA game, so maybe let's start with that one. What can you tell me about that?
Well, what was fascinating about that game, there were a lot of things. I mean, it was kind of the new era of LeBron James and the Lakers, and it was right after the fight 2 nights earlier where the Lakers lost Rajon Rondo and Brandon Ingram to suspension. And just as a reporter who's covered a lot of games in the Staples Center over the year, a lot of Spurs Lakers games, it was just surreal. First of all, to see LeBron James being a member of the Lakers for the first time in person, that was crazy. And then just this whole new era of Lakers that you're not quite sure what to make of. This was always a team traditionally that was in the mix for NBA championships. And now, as good as that game was, an argument could be made that these were the 7 and 8 seeds in the West eventually. The Spurs Lakers, just an epic game. But how good are these teams really? And what you saw in that game was a lot of competition, a lot of back and forth, but a lot of mistakes too. And it will be interesting to see how both of those storied franchises kind of deal with the rest of this season, in which they are not the Warriors. They are probably not going to go to the NBA Finals, but for one night, they certainly did entertain us. And down the stretch in that game, you saw it was kind of funny with a minute left in regulation to see all the Lakers fans leaving because they want to get to the car. They want to get to the parking lot. There's no way the Lakers are going to win this game. The Spurs blow that big lead in the last minute. You go to overtime. And then in the last minute of overtime with a minute left, there's a lot of Spurs fans there that are walking out the door because the Lakers have it in under control. And then the Spurs make their comeback. And that comeback in particular, in the last minute of overtime, you saw kind of the new Spurs offense and a lot of attractive scoring options. I asked Pop after the game about the last play when Patty Mills hit the jumper to win it, and how he decided who was going to get that shot. And he mentioned that he did have several attractive options. There were a lot of ways that the Spurs could score, and that was not something that the Spurs had last year when Kawhi Leonard was hurt and Rudy Gay was hurt for a lot of the year. Last year it was pretty much LaMarcus Aldridge, and that's it. And now you look at that game in particular. How many players had good to great offensive games? DeMar DeRozan is just a spectacular offensive player. In terms of playmaking, in terms of scoring, he does so many little things that from afar, I didn't notice, and a lot of Spurs fans, I'm sure, didn't notice, and how he can create for himself. And I mean, he's just a solid offensive player. You have LaMarcus Aldridge playing as well as he did last year. You had Patty Mills having a good game. You had Marco Bellinelli coming off the bench and scoring. Rudy Gay has been solid offensively. So on the one hand, that's a huge bright side for the Spurs to have so many different ways to get the ball in the basket. Again, you go back to the defense, and they've been, even in a bad defensive year for the league, they've been the worst. So you're right. That Lakers game in particular was kind of a summary for everything going on with the Spurs right now. Entertaining at times, they can score, but they're just having a big problem stopping people.
So that was LA. Very interesting commentary there. Like I said, I really love that game, so I loved hearing about that. And we'll see what happens with both the teams moving forward. But I guess we do immediately know what the next game held in store for San Antonio, and that, of course, was the loss just here recently to Indiana. Let's talk about that.
A lot of Spurs fans are probably thinking, how do you come home and get blown out by Indiana? Indiana is a team that maybe the average NBA fan doesn't appreciate how good they are, but this is a solid team led by a guy named Victor Oladipo, who's a true star. And after playing into overtime in an emotional game like that on what was that Monday night, and then coming back, this was obviously going to be a trap game. And maybe it was unexpected to see it so one-sided with the Pacers kind of controlling throughout. But look, like I said earlier, the Spurs are going to have problems against teams with scoring backcourts with big guards. And this is just a league right now and a team right now that can't count on a lot of stops. And if the Spurs aren't going to score themselves in large quantities, they're going to have problems, like a lot of teams in this league. And Wednesday night against the Pacers, they weren't getting the stops and they weren't getting the buckets, and that's a bad combination. But again, it's one game out of four so far. There's a long way to go. There were certainly some signs that there are things to be concerned about the rest of the season. But I don't think we need to overreact to that loss, just like I don't think we need to overreact to the overtime victory in Los Angeles.
So as you just briefly mentioned earlier in today's episode, there have been some injuries to the Spurs. That was definitely covered head on last week with Tom Osborne and I going over just the week of hell, as I've been calling it, Mike. But aside from all the changes because of the injuries, there were a lot of changes, of course, just from last season to this season. And the dynamic of the players that are now wearing Spurs jerseys is still something that people are wondering how it's going to work out. So I know that you've been specifically looking into that. Tell me about it.
Well, I was talking to LaMarcus Aldridge the other day in Los Angeles about the perception last year that he had his breakthrough year or kind of his comeback year last year during a time when the Spurs had no other kind of go-to scorers. And there was kind of some skepticism in the public that once Kawhi Leonard got back or once he had to play with somebody else, that LaMarcus might not play as well. And when the Spurs got DeMar DeRozan, there was that big question out there as to what will this mean for Aldridge? Can he share the load? Can he share the spotlight? Is he going to kind of shrink away again? And that hasn't happened so far. And like LaMarcus told me the other day, he never had a doubt in his mind that he could share the ball with DeMar DeRozan, that things were going to be just fine. And even though they're both mid-range shooters, you've seen it so far. Even in the games that the Spurs have lost, those two guys, you go back 10 years to a different era in the NBA and a LaMarcus Aldridge, DeMar DeRozan kind of double duty situation would have made the Spurs a pretty big contender in the league. That would have been a big deal in one era of the NBA to have a two-headed monster like DeRozan and Aldridge. These days, there's just so much offense out there and so many kind of big threes around the league that it doesn't measure up like it used to. But in terms of just those two guys playing with each other, that's a reason for Spurs fans to be really excited, I think. And even though they both kind of like shots in the same general area of the court, they're doing a really good job of creating for each other. And like I mentioned earlier, I've been really, really impressed with how DeMar DeRozan creates shots for his teammates. And he mentioned the other day, too, that is something that he was hoping to add to his game, regardless of where he played this year, whether he was still in Toronto or in San Antonio, to become more of a facilitator, to increase his assist totals. And against the Lakers, he had a career high 14. He's averaging more per game this year than he has in the past. And a lot of that is from by necessity with the Spurs not having any obvious star first string point guards. DeMar has kind of had to put that on himself. So again, I think a lot of fans after a loss like the one to Indiana are going to panic and be upset about the defense. But I really like the way the Spurs offense is playing and the way kind of the potential versatility that is there. They can play a lot of different ways. They can go smaller if they want to. When they play Aldridge at the 4 and Rudy Gay at the 3 and either Poeltl or Gasol at the 5, they have as big of a front court as a lot of teams in the league. So they can do a lot of different things. And I think if you're looking for silver linings early in the season, it is that the DeRozan Aldridge tandem can be pretty formidable in certain situations.
Now, Mike, we've got just enough time left, and I did hear you say the word Toronto, and my mind's got to wander. I'm still very bitter about what happened, but I love discussing it. So what do you think about what's been happening over in Toronto?
I mean, it's I think especially frustrating for Spurs fans to watch Toronto games because Kawhi Leonard is playing so well and because he is kind of reiterating the notion that he is a top 5 player in the league. And Eventually, the Spurs are going to have to get over this, and especially the fans are going to have to just kind of let it go. And in terms of thinking, that should be here, that should be with the Spurs. But I mean, he's a dominant two-way player. There was no doubt about that. The only question was how healthy he was and whether he could come back all the way from that injury. But he's a special player. I think it's a mistake to think, how did the Spurs let that go for DeMar DeRozan? Because Kawhi Leonard was not coming back here. There was no way he was coming back here. He made that clear. And the Spurs had no choice but to sell him for pennies, nickels, quarters on the dollar. And the fact that they got a bona fide all-star in return in DeMar DeRozan and a pretty promising other young piece in Jakob Poeltl, I think that's about as well as they could do in that situation. That does not lessen the frustration that a Spurs fan feels, though, when he watches the Raptors play as well as they are with Kawhi Leonard. And especially, I did watch most of that Raptors-Celtics game last week. And you have Kawhi just taking over. And then in the last couple of minutes, you have that double block of Kawhi Leonard and Danny Green chasing him down from behind and blocking that shot against the backboard. That's just kind of salt in the wound for the Spurs. But, I think it kind of exemplifies why the Raptors made that deal. And DeMar DeRozan was beloved in Toronto, and a lot of fans up there still love him. His teammates loved him. Kyle Lowry misses him. But the reason that Toronto made that deal is because Kawhi Leonard is a special player. And with him in the fold and with Danny Green doing Danny Green things, they're a legitimate force in the East and might be a favorite to play in the NBA Finals. And like you said, Chance, that can be tough for someone who follows the Spurs to see. But again, the Spurs were in a situation where they had to get something for him or lose him without getting anything in return. And I think it's just a situation where the Spurs, who've been fortunate for so many years, for decades, of always having things work out for them. This case did not work out for them, but they're still, they're still in a situation where they can make the playoffs, where they can kind of build something new around Aldridge and DeRozan, and kind of, I think it's time to just let Kawhi go and let him do Kawhi things in Toronto, and good luck to him there.
I'm going to have to let Kawhi go. That's my fault. Yeah, I'm always bringing it up. But when I hear the words or, there's something that triggers my emotion, I say, well, let's discuss. But yeah. Well,
understandable.
Good comments. All around. All right. Well, perhaps we'll not bring it up anymore. That's going to do it for today's episode. Great to speak with you, Mike. And hopefully we'll have you on again soon.
Thanks a lot.
And a big thank you to San Antonio Express News sports writer Mike Finger for joining me for today's episode of the Spurs Insider, our weekly NBA podcast from ExpressNews.com. For the San Antonio Express News, I'm Chance Dorland.